Welcome to Behind the Screen, where you get an opportunity to learn about the different collections, experiences, all the kind of stuff revolving around how we, as researchers and genealogists here at Ancestry, bring some of your favorite films, TV, ads, and all kinds of stuff to you.
Today we have a special treat. We're going to be talking about a collection that came about on Ancestry in 2021. It was so exciting that Ancestry was going to get these records. We were in high anticipation of receiving them, and all of the people in all the different departments wanted to tell stories around these record collections. So they kept asking our team, could you find some stories in the Freedmen's Bureau records?
So the Freedmen's Bureau is an incredible collection. At Ancestry, we have more than 3.7 million records that make up the Bureau. It was something that was created by Congress in 1865, although there are records that exist before that. And the Bureau was put together to help the formerly enslaved move into life as free people. So you'll find everything from labor contracts, marriages, even things regarding the U.S. colored troops and their service during the Civil War, hospitals, schools. It really spans the gamut of life. And it gives us a great opportunity to look into the lives of people in the United States, not even just the formerly enslaved, if you think about all the people that worked at the Bureau, but it covers a very specific time period, which is right before the war ends and well up into 1870 and beyond.
We want to be able to tell a story about how powerful these records truly are. So we came up with the idea that we would reverse engineer the story. In other words, find the record that we wanted to share that was really great, had lots of information, kind of represents the collection overall, and then tell a story about that person in the record and hopefully their descendants. So that's exactly what we did. We went into the collection and I found an amazing letter. It's from a man who, when he was taken away from his family, was a very young boy, and his name is Hawkins Wilson. So he wrote two letters. He wrote one letter to the Freedmen's Bureau to ask for their assistance in finding his family. He, in that first letter, mentions names of his family, who their enslavers were, where he used to live, and asked that this letter that he was writing to his sister be delivered. The second letter to his sister Jane told how he was doing. It told where he was. It told about his involvement with the local church and how he was becoming a pastor. It told about his memories with his childhood friends. He spoke of the memory of her making biscuits the night before he was taken away from his family, and Jane saying, "I'll see you again in heaven."
I don't know a single person that can read that letter and not become emotional. I often feel like if you read it and you don't want to cry or you cannot empathize with this young man who was a grown man, I don't know. I would imagine you probably don't cry about anything. But for me, it was the fact that he took us in like a time machine back to when he was the age he was when he was sold. And sometimes I think with enslaved people remove their humanity in a way where like it's almost like they didn't have emotions, and that because they may not have been able to read and write, they can't give you turn by turn directions on how to get back to a place that they once were because they were not literate. But he shows in this letter that he could do both of those things. He could feel and he could tell you specific details about what happened and what he experienced, which completely goes against how people think about enslaved people at that time and even potentially now.
And the idea that this young man, he was only 6, so this child really could remember all of these things about where he was enslaved and then reiterate that to the Freedmen's Bureau in order to try to find his family is truly remarkable. This letter really helps people understand what enslavement was like, being torn away from your family at a very young age, seeking out to be reunited with family after emancipation, after the Civil War, and turning to the Freedmen's Bureau for assistance in that regard.
Freedmen's Bureau, the need for it, I feel like the letter from Hawkins just displays it in so many ways, because it's like one part him going to the Bureau and asking for a service, and then 2, having an expectation that the Bureau deliver something for him. So it was like a 2-part process. And so you really got an opportunity to kind of walk into the office with him in a very intimate way that I don't feel like you can get by necessarily looking at a list of students at a school.
In the letter to the Freedmen's Bureau, he mentioned an Uncle Jim with his aunt. He mentioned 3 sisters, Jane, Martha, and Matilda. He mentioned his cousin Buck. All of these people in his family were owned by different enslavers. They were not owned together in the letter. George Jefferson was one of the enslavers. Jack Langley was another of the enslavers. So all of these really specific names, and it said that they were from Caroline County, Virginia. I would almost think that Jane would say, now remember my name, remember this enslaver, remember this place, to this 6-year-old boy saying, remember these things. And perhaps that's what happened so that he would keep those in his mind because he knew one day, maybe we could find our family again. And so we felt like it was a perfect opportunity to take this information that was now on Ancestry and see if we could truly find Hawkins' family. Ideally, we wanted to be able to deliver that letter to Jane's descendants or any of his family. So we had a location, we had names of white enslavers, we had names of the enslaved, and we had the variable places, so we had lots of options. And so we started in Galveston and tried to see where he went. He lived the rest of his days in Houston, and he ended up passing away there. He had 2 children, and Cyrilla, his daughter, had descendants. So I reached out to multiple descendants of Hawkins through letters, through email. Kelly Dixon Teeler is a descendant of Hawkins Wilson. I connected with Kelly and let her know we have some exciting family history information we want to share with you. We don't want to give away too much because we really think it's going to be an experiential thing, but just hang on with us for a little bit, and I promise you won't be disappointed. And much to her credit, she did. And she says to this day, I talk to her still, she says, it's all because I answered the phone. It's all because I picked up that phone. It's all because I called back. So we had Kelly on the hook, patiently waiting for months, actually, while we tried to find the other side of the family. But we had to keep it under wraps because the whole idea was we wanted the reunion with Hawkins' descendants and his long-lost family.
And you did a great synopsis of an extended research process because I think sometimes, especially with this story, people think because we had exact names, we had exact locations, well, then that meant that you had an exact map. But think of it in terms of like, you could have the same exact location and you could have 10 maps from 10 different years. You especially encountered this with Wright Store because that was something that was mentioned.
Yes, we did. And that's a really good point because Hawkins talked about where these enslavers lived. He said they lived near Wright Store. That's the other section of all of this. So we found the descendant of Hawkins. That was the first box to check. We had to make sure that Hawkins had descendants that we could tell the story to, and he did. So then we said, okay, we need to find his family. And to Nika's point, it talked about Wright Store. It talked about Caroline County. So I thought, oh, Caroline County, Virginia, that's where it said it was. Easy peasy, right? So I know, she laughs because she knows the process. So I was naively thinking, we have so much information, how could I not find it? So I asked one of our friends, Melissa Betts, who I worked with on this beginning parts of this project, said, hey, I'm not finding this. I'm looking in Caroline County. I'm not finding these names of these enslavers. I'm not finding any reference to Wright Store. She was across the country. We dug in on Zoom. We talked all the time, researching. She's looking at newspapers. I'm looking at records on Ancestry. We're just going back and forth. And it was kind of about the same time where we came to the conclusion that Caroline County did not seem to be the right place. Here's the key, though. In that letter, it said he was sold at a sheriff's sale at Boydton Courthouse. Boydton is nowhere near Caroline County. It is in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. Caroline County is up on the northeast corner of Virginia. Mecklenburg is smack dab south on the border of North Carolina. So I thought, let's look at Mecklenburg and see if there happens to be a Dr. George Jefferson. Well, guess what? There was a Dr. George Jefferson, and there was a Langley, and all of the other people that were mentioned that were white enslavers living in that county. However, some of them were also living just across the border in North Carolina, in Warren County.
I actually think it was the Bureau official who in trying to help him, was like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So they're probably thinking, he's mistaken. He thinks it's this county, but it's actually this one. So the letter ended up going to the wrong field office. It was a completely different part of the state. So it wasn't even, they couldn't even walk it there.
It was never delivered.
Never delivered.
It was never delivered. And in fact, it stayed in the Caroline County office, and the guy that was managing it was fired for drunkenness. So you can tell he was a real upstanding guy.
With the Bureau, when you look at, the news articles at the time of when it closed and how many records there were, they talk about the Bureau being in disarray and the fact that records were just haphazard. There was no organization to them. So the fact that we still have this letter is like a miracle. It was a miracle that Hawkins got to the field office. It was a miracle he remembered all the details, but it was also a miracle that it survived time as a loose paper and the disarray of the Bureau records to make it to the National Archives, to be microfilmed, to be digitized. It was like a whole lot of steps.
Absolutely.
In order for us to even get to this place. So in my opinion, I feel like that means that this absolutely had to happen.
I could not agree more. I just felt like we have everything telling us, go find this family. So we found the right place, and it was kind of a fun, serendipitous way that we found it. Melissa was looking at one thing, I was looking at another. I had found Dr. George Jefferson, and she found Wright Store. Wright Store is a voting district within Mecklenburg County in this little area right on the border. And then we learned more about Warren County, North Carolina, that the Warren County and the Mecklenburg County, people had land that were in both states, both counties, that crossed the line, perhaps for tax reasons, all kinds of reasons they could do that. But that community lived, two states together. So it was very much one place versus two separate places. But that meant we had to look at two different sets of records. We had a lot of information that we had to go through to see if we could really find Jane's family. Records on Ancestry, records at archives, libraries, all these different places. There's lots of ways that the enslaved passed from hand to hand, and we wanted to try to understand the lives of the enslavers so we knew where to look. We built trees for Dr. Jefferson, for Jack Langley, and others to see if we could truly find their path. They mostly stayed in those areas, which was great. That meant there was lots of records about them. We went to Family Search to look at deeds in North Carolina. We also looked at Virginia birth records. So that meant we had names of the enslaver usually, sometimes the name of the mother of the child, and then the name of the child and the year they were born, which is incredible. We had really important information regarding Jane's children in the letter, specifically a daughter and two sons that she had by name. Julia was the name of the daughter. So we thought if we could get someone like Julia closer, perhaps she's in records like those Virginia birth records. So we looked at all the Julias in the county. We looked at all the Roberts in the county. We looked at all the Janes. We went through every single name and made spreadsheet after spreadsheet of records with all these different names of the formerly enslaved people that were in the 1870 census. Could they have been those people? We had spreadsheets for days. We would have loved to have had Ancestry Networks at this time, a product that's now available on Ancestry, to organize this kind of information, because this truly was a network. It was a network of the Mecklenburg and Warren County enslaved to be able to put together the communities around them to see if we could truly find them.
And I think you also bring up a very good point, thinking that these folks emerged from enslavement with the same exact surnames. We can't make that assumption. Like, our biggest bet is to look at given name, look at age, and look at location and slaveholder. Several families that I'm related to, we're all from the same people, but we have different surnames, and it's from the exact same group of people. So especially with networks, that'll help you suss things out, especially if you find patterns, because sometimes it may even be the same name, but there might be an E or an I as opposed to it being spelled exactly the same way, and you're in the exact same county. And I always laugh because people go, oh, well, we're not related to those set of Smiths. And it's like, actually, you are.
Actually, we are, but their name's Jones. That's the
Right. For enslavement, that's exactly what it would be. It's like, you're Smith, they're Jones, but you're the same mom.
Yeah. And that's interesting because it means that people had control over their surname, or they carried a surname with them that they were known by previously. Yeah. There were surnames that did exist around the enslaved, they just weren't usually recorded. So they could have come from a great-grandfather who was one of their first enslaved that the family came from, but no longer are enslaved to that family. It could be any reason that they chose a name, But usually it's because that's how they were identified within their community.
Right.
So we can't just assume it's the last enslaver. We can't assume it would be Jefferson or Langley. So we really had to dive in and get to know all of the people in these two counties. So spreadsheets for days, lots and lots of records. And it was about that time that we said, you know what? We have a deadline. We need to.
God forbid we have a deadline.
No, we have a deadline. We got to get this done.
And we didn't have an ending.
No.
And so there was a little scrambling. I mean, you know, at one point I was definitely involved in all the spreadsheets and looking and we're double and triple checking. Did we go through this? I mean, it was a lot.
We also included ProGen, which is a professional research arm of Ancestry. They're fantastic. Worked with a lot of people there. Tracy was one of them. Noah was another. They're really specialists in their field, so they know where to go. On top of that, we did a research trip. So Jen Utley, myself, and Tracy Zappala, who was at ProGen at the time, we went to Virginia. I was so excited to finally go to the place that I'd been reading about, researching, hoping that that would give us some clues. I felt like I knew all of these families, this community of people before the war, after the war, and I wanted to see the places where they lived, going on farms that were looking for headstones that were buried in the backyards of farms back in the day. I went and knocked on doors and asked if we could we look at your farm? And they're like, oh, sure. Who are these ladies coming to look? They were very, very awesome people. We talked to a lot of people around the neighborhood that told us stories about the county, especially in Boydton. We went to the Library of Virginia, which is a fantastic genealogical resource. And we even went and found 2 historical Black cemeteries in the region. Both of those cemeteries were not on Find a Grave, no photos. So what does a genealogist do when there's no photos on Find a Grave and you're in a graveyard? You take photos. It was Jen and Tracy and I, and the sun was about to set. We're like, let's go. You take this row, I'll take that row. It was like the strategic maneuver. You go, 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 go. So we were taking photos, click, click with our iPhones, trying to go systematically throughout the rows. And we did that with both of the cemeteries we were at, knowing that we'll get to at some point to upload it to Find a Grave. And we were able to do that, which is really kind of just a little side offering. And then we went to the county courthouses too. We went to that actual county courthouse where Hawkins was sold. The courthouse was built only a year prior to him being sold away. So that courthouse is still standing in Boydton, which is the seat of Mecklenburg County. We even went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and looked through their special collections. It was just after COVID. We had to do all of these like special things. We had to wear masks the whole time. We went through so many records. Every time there was someone mentioned that was enslaved, we just took a picture. We can't leave the name on the page and put it back in the box. We wanted to get all the names out. So we kept putting those names in spreadsheets, kept researching. And it was at that moment, that trip, that I got a call from Noah. So Tracy, Jen, and I were in Virginia, but Noah was still researching. And he said, you guys are gonna wanna get on the phone for this one. So we got on Zoom and he showed us a deed that he had found in Warren County, North Carolina. And it was for a man named Thomas Talley. And Thomas Talley had listed the enslaved that he owned and how he was passing the enslaved to his children before his death. It was not a will, it was just an exchange of what was then noted as property. And in that document was Hawkins' name. Not only was it Hawkins, it was Martha, it was Matilda, and it was Hawkins' mother, Gatha. We were gobsmacked. It was the most amazing moment. We're all crying. We couldn't believe it. We knew we were in the right place. And now we had a name, Talley. He was with the Talley family before. They were all together. And somehow they all got sold to different people. And that was really a key moment for us.
And then we were still working in tandem trying to find descendants of Jane and Julia. So it was kind of a time-spanning chasm. We were doing Back to the Future and the present at the exact same time. And that whole process, again, it was needed because it was great context for the story, but we still needed descendants.
We still didn't have the ending, and you guys, it haunted me.
That's such an accurate phrase.
It's haunted me forever. And Nika knows because I'd call her and lament and be like, what am I missing? And she's like, I don't know, because I've looked everywhere too. So I wanted this story just to happen. I was trying to will it into existence somehow. But in the meantime, we have to pitch it. We've got to get going. So I pitched what I wanted for the ending to internal partners. Those internal partners then caught the vision. They saw that this truly was a way to help people see the power of the Freedmen's Bureau records and the power of family history. Ancestry loved it. Then we had to find a partner because a story can't be told worldwide if you don't have a way to distribute that story. So we wanted to find a really fantastic partner to be able to tell this story authentically, tell this story from a lens that maybe we haven't seen it before. And honestly, like Nika had said, it wanted to be told. It was waiting to be told. So we pitched it, and then later on we were able to close a deal with Paramount. And that's where our director comes in.
So Rashidi Natara Harper, and I have to say all three names because when he puts his heart into something, he includes all of his names. He comes from like music videos and like documentary. And so this was a new lane for him, especially with regard to family history and this particular storytelling. And I remember early conversations that we had, he just really wanted to make sure that he like did justice to this story and really showed the story of enslavement from a different perspective than we normally see. And so, you know, I was brought in, Dr. Skip Gates was brought in, but at the crux of it, I also felt like was the imagery that was used. So you have people to direct, you have people to create and craft the image, and even down to like animation and all kinds of stuff. It was great for me to be a part of that creative process, not just from the research side, but also from the documentary portion of it. The director of photography, Rob Benavides, those incredible shots that we were able to get of the water and just being on the water. I remember there were parts that we filmed in Galveston where I was like, how in the world are they going to hear us? Because the water is so loud, but you could hear us. Driving, I drove a lot. I did all my own stunts. If you want to qualify, I did a lot of driving at very specific speeds. And, you know, there's a camera mounted on the car, and then there's another one right next to me, and then there's people in the back seat, like 2 rows. And, you know, it's supposed to be me in this car driving by myself, having my thoughts and, you know, all of that. That's like a core memory for me, the entire process of like filming and just moving locations, because in essence, what the film does is it follows Hawkins' letter. So, I mean, you were there too, the entire
Yes,
time.
I was. I was lucky enough to be on set with you. And Nika was our voice of ancestry that was able to kind of be the guide. You were truly a guide in every way. She was able to guide Kelly and her mother, Miss Marie, who again are both descendants of Hawkins, through this experience of discovering their family. And so we got Paramount on the line, and we got that all set. We have Rashidi and his team, Harperville Studios, and Paramount with the distribution. We had a shoot date. We were about a month away from shooting at this point. I had a month, and Jen Utley, who I adore and is my boss and my friend and a mentor, said to me, "Lise, you got to end it. You got to find an ending." And every time I went to the computer to try to write the ending of what I think where we should go with this, because we did not have anyone to reunite them with or deliver the letter to, I just got a sick feeling in my stomach. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave all of those names alone. I kept digging. I just kept digging. And this is the biggest thing that I learned from this experience more than anything. Go back to what you found and look at it again with your new lens of context. We had done all of this research at the front when I was talking about records and gathering and spreadsheets. We had done all of this, and we had gone over it again, but I was really far along in the process of really understanding this entire story, this entire area, the whole family, and I just knew that those birth records that we had with Virginia birth records, like there has to be something there. There has to be. And sure enough, there was. So remember the names: Jefferson, Langley, all these different names that we have floating around. I found a record for a Langley, and then that Langley, she moved to Warren County, North Carolina. Remember, that community is all part of the same group. North Carolina has death records, and on her death record, it listed her parents as Jim and Addie Langley. Those are the names in the letter. Those were the aunt and uncle of Hawkins. And those were this woman's parents, and they were Langleys. And it said that they were enslaved by Langleys. I didn't know if I found it. I wanted it to be true, but I kept reading it over and over, and I knew at that moment I had found the uncle and aunt that are in the letter. I lost it. I just burst into tears. And remember, this experience that like from start to finish, this is about 18 months of my life at Ancestry. I did lots of other things around it, but this was a constant, heartbeat. And here I had the missing thing that I needed. I immediately called Jen. Now, Jen was on location in California shooting somewhere else, some other thing that we were doing. Jen was on a break from her shoot and in the green room and said, Jen, I found it. She's like, what'd you find? I got her on the Zoom and she's there and there's people I could see in the background. It's people, the crew of this thing she's shooting. They're crying, Jen's crying, I'm crying. We couldn't believe that we had finally done what we set out to do. We found the people to deliver the letter to. I immediately started looking for descendants. I needed to find those people. We had to contact them and hope they were willing to participate in this amazing thing that we had prepared. And quite honestly, it was the fastest I've ever found descendants, ever. Quicker than any other tree I've done. I found a woman named Valerie. Valerie then led me to her cousin, Linda. Valerie goes on Ancestry to find different records about the enslaved that she can draw from to then create scripts that she uses in her work in reenactment. At Jamestown and Williamsburg, she was representing so many different enslaved people and wanted to hear their voices and their experiences. So she was going on Ancestry and looking at those records. She then connected me to Linda, who she said is my favorite cousin. She's like a sister. And I immediately knew that these were the two women that needed to be a part of this production. They were available, they were willing. We didn't want to tell them right away either because we wanted them to experience this on their side as a discovery moment as well. So now we have Linda and Valerie on one side, and we have Kelly and Miss Marie on the other. And now, finally, the story is ready to be told. And that's what leads us right to the shoot.
One thing that I'm thinking about in this context is, well, oftentimes I'll just go back and like look at the video and just read people's comments and feedback because everyone takes so much from it. But people are often asking, well, what about Jane? What about Jane? And I really want folks to realize that Uncle Jim and Addie were also still Hawkins's family. And the quest for Jane continues. But that doesn't mean that just because you don't find exactly what you're looking for, what you set out for, that's not a gift. It still is a gift. And the way that it came together so quickly, and especially considering the timelines of everything that and the constraints that we were working on, like I could not believe, I still to this day, I don't even know. Like I feel like you had magic like sprinkled on you.
I felt like I really had the ancestors around me. I felt their want to connect the families. I just felt like, no, keep going. And it got to the point that last few weeks where any idea that came into my head, I would do. So the minute, if I'm looking at some other record and some idea came to my head, like, oh, I wonder if it's something, I'd stop and immediately go to that. I was trying to just listen to my own experience, listen to the ancestors, all the things, all the energy, trying to get me to that place. The best advice I can give is keep looking, keep trying, especially because those records were not available yet. They were not indexed yet, so they would have been a lot harder to find. So the fact that we were able to find them so quickly was amazing. So we got everything set and started out in Houston, where you joined us as the guide extraordinaire.
And thankfully, Kelly was so gracious to have all these production people in her house, in her dining room and in her living room. We basically took over, and then we took over the deck outside. But for me, one of the things that I had to be very mindful of is leading them through the process and allowing them to process everything that they were hearing in the moment. And sometimes that can be a lot for people, because they walk in thinking, yeah, this is about family history, but they don't know exactly what that is because we don't want to give it away. We want them to experience it. And so, just being very careful, having to sort of lay it out in a particular way. And when we got to the shots outside, when they were reading the letters, and, it was so interesting because I fully expected for Kelly to be the one to be emotional, but it was Miss Marie who was the one that it really hit her. And there was a moment where she talked about remembering sitting around her grandparents at their house and like how all these memories started flooding back to her. And that was her connection back to this story. And so I think that's really truly the power of discovery. and the power of connecting back to your ancestors. It's the fact that you don't know that you have these seeded memories in you, but when you see these records and you see these names and you unearth these stories, those seeds start to well up and those plants start to grow, and it's a flower that you didn't even anticipate.
They were all in at that point. You could have taken them anywhere and they would have followed you because they were so excited to learn more. And next was Galveston.
Some of the stuff didn't end up in the film. We were next to one of the churches that Hawkins would preach at. And ironically, Miss Marie talked about her childhood coming from Houston to Galveston on trips down this main street there that we were on, and how she didn't know she was passing by all this time. She was passing by this church that her ancestor was preaching at. And so we went there. We went along the water. We were out on a jetty. And it was windy, and, I'm having to contextualize why we were there and the scores of people who were brought into this respective location.
It's a beautiful shot. Sun is setting. I have headphones on. I can hear them having conversations, and they're waiting for the cameras to roll and us to be ready. And I'm hearing questions. Miss Marie's asking, Kelly's asking, they want to know more. It's this really delicate balance, which you've done beautifully at guiding them through and giving them just enough to understand. And they understood. In fact, when I've talked to Miss Marie since, that was one of her favorite moments, was just being out on that jetty and realizing all the enslaved that had come into that area, whether Hawkins came through that way or not, but just the fact that this was a place of enslavement. This was the place where he was when he wrote that letter in Galveston, and it meant a lot to them. And they knew at that moment that you were taking them to Virginia, specifically Mecklenburg County.
I knew that once we got to Virginia, we had already dealt with a certain amount of emotion, but it was going to be even more there was going to be more gravity to it, because we would literally be standing in the same space in front of the same building that this atrocity took place at. That was a big responsibility, because I kind of had to stick my landing, because you can't retell it. You have to get it pretty much on the first try. And the other thing is, because we're telling a story that they're not familiar with, you have to create a timeline, you have to contextualize it so that they understand and they can process and they can verbalize those things. So when we get to Boydton, it was like a stark contrast from Houston to Boydton.
Yes, very much so.
This is like a tiny little enclave, we'll say that, the tavern across the street.
Yeah, little town.
The original courthouse building was there. They had actually renovated it, so the inside was brand new, but the outside was exactly the same. It was a beautiful day, but the story was not beautiful at all. And it was an interesting juxtaposition of the weather and the sunlight and the light and the brightness that was being brought to a very dark and just somber story. It definitely culminated in the moment that we had Kelly read the letter to Jane in front of the courthouse, where Hawkins is recounting, all these childhood memories and all these things, and it was a grown man basically telling his sister all the things he's wanted to say to her over the last 30, 40 years since they had seen each other. And that's when Kelly got emotional. There was no way that the dam was not going to break at that point, because it was just, I remember her saying, this is too much. She said that a lot. This is too much. This is too much. I remember her saying that. And I felt blessed that I could usher them into that experience. I considered it an honor for me to be there to guide them into it.
That was like a very sacred moment. And that set was as quiet. You could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet. And that was a really important moment. In our job, it's really important for us to remember the silence when we're sharing something with people. So when we share a story, we want to make sure that we don't comment when there's silence. We wanted them to have the silence to process what they're hearing. And they needed it, and they processed it. And Nico, you were so good at that. You were so fantastic at just giving them the air to breathe and the air to feel. And they needed that time and space to just really comprehend where they were. If you've ever walked where your family has walked, the importance of that, the gravity, the weight, the emotional, all of it just comes crashing down. And that for them was that really big moment.
We left that scene, and ended up on the land, which that's another, I think, key part of the story. That's where I feel like ProGen shined, but ProGen really shined on the mapping of the exact land and location of where the land was.
And where Hawkins probably was born. And so that was the next place we went.
Right. And so we're just standing out on the road.
On the road.
On the
Just
road.
on the side.
On the side,
the
right.
public part.
Yeah, the public part. We were on the public part of the road.
Yeah.
And at this point, I have to set the scene. I have to tell them exactly where we are. Again, as you're watching the film, you're watching like live us taking them through the process. It happened live. So, we're standing on the side of the road and again, they had just gone through that moment and that scene at the courthouse with the letter and then being told about the mortgaging and the selling and all of that. And now I had to introduce to them that they were going to meet family members on the other side of this. So I just remember I was like, oh my God, like, how do I set this up? Like, okay, like, all right, I got to talk about this is probably where he was born. Okay. And then I was like, I'm just going to drop it. Like, that's what I thought. I was like, I'm just going to drop it. Like, there's kind of like no other way to do this. And so I was like, we think he was born here and this is not the end of the journey. For me, I could breathe a sigh of relief because I've been holding on to the ending of this thing.
So well.
Well, but the thing is, you got to remember, this was over like 2 weeks. I cannot say anything. We're not just interacting when the cameras are on. Like, we're going to dinner. We're doing all this stuff. And it was torture. You just want to be like, hey, you have other family members, they're coming. And I couldn't say
Even
that.
at dinner, they would be like, I don't know what y'all have planned next, but we are tired. Like, this is a lot. Because they had done the Galveston. We did the courthouse and the land and then the ending all in one day. And so it was a big day. It was a big day. But before we got to them getting to the end, we had to tell Linda and Valerie, why are you here? They didn't know this about their family. They didn't know about Hawkins. They knew they went to the Langleys, but they didn't know who Langleys were owned by. So we were able to give them that family history as well. So that day of the shoot, really early, at like 7 a.m, we asked them, they were so wonderful, asked them to come to the steps of a church, a local church that some of the family, extended family, are buried. And that's where we were going to film our finale. So they did not find out until the morning of the shoot, that they were going to meet 2 distant cousins. And it was so fantastically awesome. There were no cameras. It was just me with my iPhone, so I could film it for them. It was just Nika and I and Valerie and Linda. And Linda found out that the letter was written on her father's birthday. And it's on her father's side that she's connected to Hawkins. And her father had passed away. She had missed him. She always had felt like a longing for connection to family. This filled her well. This helped her feel that connection. Valerie, the wisest woman I've ever met, I think, just said pearls of wisdom. The pastor of the church was in the church, and we got to sit with him and just talked about miracles and the times and seasons, and kind of gave us an amazing just sermon right there in that church in this emotional moment. And it was beautiful. And then Nika had to leave there and go film at the courthouse, which you talked about. And so she was buzzing all over the place and we, running around. But so then they would wait and knew that they were going to be meeting with their distant cousins. And that's when we came to the church.
And the one thing that I think about, especially with the church and like that scene that's adjacent to the cemetery, there was this gorgeous pink like bush. I don't even know what that thing was, but it had taken on a life of its own, and somebody was coming out there pruning that thing because it did not come out of whatever pot it was in. It did not look like that. And I just remember, gosh, this is a beautiful plant, and like seeing all the surnames of all the people in this community on the headstones in the cemetery, and then us like orchestrating, okay, we only got one time to like get this right. So we kind of had to mark our places, like, all right, you come here. And then I had to like figure out, like, we had to keep their backs turned, and I had to lead them out to like a certain spot, and then they had to walk out. and it was a dance. And then we had Video Village over here to the side. So
That was me. That's where I was.
right. So everyone's on headphones and headsets, and I wasn't sure when to walk out.
I know. It's just kind of like, do I kind of
Like I didn't know what to do.
and it was great because what Rashidi was really excellent at, as well as Nika, like I said before, is giving space. And he wanted to make sure that that reunion was not cameras in their face, zoom in, watch them cry. You know, he wanted to have us be a little bit removed from them so they could have a true, authentic moment. And that's what we did. And so they were in one spot, cameras were pretty far back. So that moment comes where, you know, you so beautifully just said, meet your family. And that's when I just lost it. That whole moment, it was that moment of that I'd been hoping for, that we all had wanted. And it was there, it was actual, it was real. And they just, like, first of all, Linda said, are you a hugger? And they said, yes. He said, oh, good, so am I. And then they hugged and they just wept. I watched Miss Marie and Valerie weep and say, we never knew you existed. And just, that is what family history is all about. Bringing people together, bringing stories to the forefront, connecting people with their story and showing you how important it is to keep those stories alive. And so I took off my headphones and just like walked away and was bawling because I didn't want to like bawl in front of everybody, but I just bawled because it was kind of the end. If any of you have ever had a moment where you've worked so hard, I mean, I'm not an Olympian, believe me, but I'm just saying, it's one of those moments where you've just been training and training for something and you finally did it and you finally got it across that finish line, and that's where we were. And it was so beautifully done. So much credit to Nika, so much credit to you for guiding it and just being the like caretaker of that story so wonderfully. And special shout out to Paige at Ancestry, incredible from start to finish, being a champion of it. So many hands worked on this: marketing, content, public relations, brand, communications, just so many people. And then to get it on our site, to get it on our YouTube channels so that we could bring this story to you so you can see it from start to finish. It was just a beautiful, beautiful moment, and it made me grateful for my job and grateful for the Freedmen's Bureau Records that brought us this story in the first place.
And I think this whole story and us laying out like the behind the screen moments of it, it really drives home the point that this is magic. It's a little bit of magic in here. Yeah, it's tech. Yeah, it's people. Yeah, it's stories. But like, this is the magic of self-discovery, and that it's getting you to things and stories and people that you didn't even know existed or that were going to become meaningful parts of your life. And so I just really hope that if you haven't watched the film, that you would take the opportunity to do so at our YouTube channel. The film is called A Dream Delivered: The Lost Letters of Hawkins Wilson, and I guarantee you, you will get something from it just personally, or maybe there may be a tip or trick or something you never thought about that will help you in your genealogical journey.